Let me start the questions. I'll ask you. You said two things. One is they're going to have macroeconomic tailwinds, but you also said there are no barriers to entry. How can you reconcile the two? How can you have pricing power from macro when there's no limit to supply increase?
I'll clarify first on the barriers to entry. What did you interpret, that there were no barriers to entry?
Limited barriers to entry, that new supply can come in with no problem.
We want to clarify on that. So when we say limited barriers to entry, what we mean is, and we're talking specifically about the fact that there's a fragmented market, the makeup of this market is 90% outside of these big four. A big component of that market is what we call mom and pop shops, small self-storage facilities, one location that basically your mom and pop can run. We want to talk specifically about the financing that would be used to fund someone running that store. So we talk specifically in some of our risks about the easing of bank regulations and the fact that banks currently are hoarding more cash than ever, which is making it a lot harder for mom and pops to get financing to enter this market. Talking about the top end of that market, the 10%, it is very difficult to replicate what Sovereign has in terms of their revenue management system, their breadth, the number of locations, where they are. That's what makes it hard to enter this market. And
to add on to that, the favorable macroeconomic conditions, jolts, and the aging baby boomer generation, that's going to lead to increased movement. And obviously movement for storage facilities is really good because you have to store your stuff in your house when you are moving. So those are the macroeconomic.
Oh, can I say one more thing? Basically, the main thing that's improving pricing power, and management has stressed this, is the limited industry supply. While we see all these macroeconomic tailwinds that's improving demand, supply over the last 2 years has only grown 1% and 1.5% respectively.
What's the yield and its ability to maintain its dividend?
The yield exactly is 3.2%. Talking specifically about their ability to maintain that, and kind of go back in time to looking at during the recession, 2007 to 2009, these companies had to keep paying out cash essentially so that you wouldn't have investors running away. In order to do that, they financed through equity, through debt, and through their consistent ability to generate cash. Now, obviously, in an economic downturn, you're not going to have as many people using self-storage. So Sovereign's management had to adapt. So what they started to do was they invested opportunistically. They put more money into revenue management systems so that they could capitalize on increased occupancy rates to essentially drive up people that are using their storage facilities to generate cash. They needed to do it.
And to make that answer a little shorter, as a REIT, you have to pay out 90% out of income, so that's how they're going to maintain it.
And to add one more thing, he talked about the economic downturn. During this period, Sovereign basically added a new line item to its income statement. It's dividends paid in excess of net income. So for REITs, it's very important to maintain your dividend yield. That's a primary reason for investors to hold the shares of Sovereign Self-Storage. So they basically stress maintaining that dividend yield going forward.
In regards to the discounted cash flow model, can you talk about the free cash flow concept and how much they're having to pull out of the cash that they generate from operations for acquisitions and capital expansion, and what your assumptions were for normalizing that in your forecast?
Which, just to clarify, because there's a lot of stages we can go through that, which specifically do you want us to come at first? Their ability to generate cash flows? What I would call the maintenance capex for them in your forecast. So and how that compared to the historical norms. Yes, so maintenance capex, and I'll pull up a specific graph here. Give me one moment. We had to scale this within our model. So we looked at historical acquisitions, and we looked at how much money they were spending in certain years when maybe they were acquiring 20 properties, maybe they were acquiring 15. And so looking at property expenses, we would have to decompose that into the components. Which part of this is maintenance capex? Which part of this is going to just upgrading facilities, new facilities? And so in our projections, we scaled that. Anytime we were using debt to fund acquisitions, we would have to scale property expenses with that moving forward. One other question you asked was maintenance capex. So we like to look at this relatively as well. So we looked at the three competitors and said, what's their maintenance capex per square foot? And Sovereign falls in the middle of a very wide band. Their two top competitors, EXR and PSA, spend about 5 cents per square foot. Sovereign spends about 42, and on the low end, Cube, or on the high end, is spending about 83. So Sovereign's kind of in the middle, and so looking at their acquisition strategy, we have to factor that in, of course.
So to expand on what we looked into when we developed the acquisition growth rate, we looked at the debt capacity and we used basically guidance that management has just given us through their earnings calls. So going forward, they issued $125 million of equity for 2015. Because of this, they've already committed to buy 9 properties, and they're really transparent with their acquisition strategy. So we believe that they will acquire about 20 to 25 properties going forward, slowing down from 2014.
On this slide too, I have a question on the price paid per acquisition square foot. Do you know why there's a big difference between 2013 and 2014, and how do you incorporate that on your assumption for the valuation?
So incorporating this in our valuation, we actually went very, very detailed, and we looked at where they were acquiring. So in 2013, the properties in basically where they were going were more expensive. Certain markets that they're entering have much more limited supply. So if you're going to push for more properties in Florida, you're going to have to spend a little bit more money. However, in 2014, they kind of shifted their management strategy to looking at properties in the Midwest, where prices weren't as expensive, but there were still attractive market dynamics. Moving forward, we tried to guesstimate based on earnings calls. We had a great chance to sit down with the management and ask, they couldn't tell us everything, but where are you looking to go? And so we scaled real estate prices in those current locations to address limited industry supply over the next couple years, and then a re-engaging, so supply growth might speed up a little bit and prices might start to level out.
So then to expand on that a little bit, if you want to pull up the saturation.
Sure.
So we wanted to look at where are they going and why. So when we look at where Sovereign is located, we want to look at low square foot per person, because that's going to drive demand for self-storage. And then they also want to be in locations where it's a highly population density. So specifically what Stephen mentioned was they're going after in the Midwest, Missouri. That's why the prices were lower in 2013 and 14.
Has management divested properties? Do they both acquire and divest? Or?
Yes, they do.
To be more specific, in 2014, they bought about 40 properties. They divested 5, all of which were in North Carolina. The great thing about their revenue management system is it gives a lot of feedback. And Kev will go into more detail, but essentially what it told them was, this isn't the market you want to be in. And so immediately they were out.
Yeah, the great thing about being such a big company, they can outsource the revenue management system. They do this to a company called Veritex Solutions. And what Veritex Solutions does for them, it takes 10 years of historical info with 7 key indicators to determine the optimal pricing strategy for the company per facility. So it takes in anticipatory occupancy rates, takes in competitors in a 5 to 10 mile radius, and call center traffic. They're the only 24-hour call center within their competitors, so that's one plus that they have.
In addition, Sovereign utilizes what we call third-party management and joint venture. What this allows them to do in markets where they may not have entered before is test the waters. So they can engage in a relationship with a property owner. They can do an exchange of equity and say, we want to see if this is going to be an attractive area for us to move into. And if that turns out not to be the case, they back out of the agreement, and it gave them a chance to see the market. It might not have been where they want it to be, and so they can remove themselves.
Can you give me a sense for how much original research you did by talking to either management, suppliers, other competitors, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of their debt, one of the things that we were really concerned on was the debt aspect. So I actually talked to the CFO about their debt capacity, certain covenants that they have. Recently, in February, they acquired 5 properties, and they did it totally under equity. And so I called and just asked about that, why not the 70-30 split? And he just basically said it was an attractive price right now with their stock price, just to do it fully through equity and to bring up the weights between their debt and equity basis.
We also visited their corporate headquarters, where we were able to take a tour. Basically, we got to see what exactly the revenue management system does. We took a tour of their call center, and we saw exactly who works in their web marketing department.
We also visit their storage facilities, which hands-on are, compared to the mom and pops, a complete difference, as they have, the multi-tier, they have a key combination so you can get access 24 hours a day. It's a complete
Did you visit any competitors or no?
Say again?
Did you visit any competitors?
Yeah, we visited a couple of mom shops and public storage. It's in the area, but they just don't have the structure that Uncle Bob has.
All right, thank you.
You mentioned interest rate sensitivity. What is the mix of fixed to floating